Hello, saints. How's your journey going? Do you fear God? You know, I have family members who had their Christian journey filled with the fear, shame, and guilt of what it means to be a follower of God. One such person I know is in such abused form that he can't even come back to the church. I hope your journey isn't anything like that. We aren't to fear God. I mean, think of David in the most popular psalm, Psalms 23. He says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because God is with him. He says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. He didn't have that kind of fear. And we know some of the things about King David, but yet he was a man after God's own heart. He also says there in Psalms 27, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? If God is our light and salvation, we should not fear him. Now I know we use the word fear to also represent God's awesomeness, to pay reverence to him. Such as when we read there in the first angel's message of Revelation 14, fear God, give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come. The fear there isn't to be afraid of God, but to pay him the respect. He is an awesome God. And God is now there in that first message coming back to take the earth back and to bring in justice. And so we should fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has certainly come. But we're not talking about the fear that many people live in, because we know we don't measure up. And God wants us to know that he loves us. Psalms and David writes, he says, when I am afraid, I will trust in you. And so when you're afraid, David didn't say, if I'm afraid, I will trust in you. He's just like the rest of us. We have moments where fear comes to us. We're human beings. And when you find yourself afraid, put your trust in God, and that fear will go away. David says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Psalms 34:4. And so we have peace with God that we can be happy to have. Micah, one of those little books of the 12 at the end of the Old Testament. I love Micah. Micah chapter 7 has some of my favorite verses in it. But in Micah 4:4 he says, each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree with no one to make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken it. Now, you know, sometimes the patriarch of the house, has his favorite chair there in the living room, and he sits there at the chair in the family, and he can pontificate and speak to the family as in his position. Back in the Bible days, it wasn't a chair in your living room; it was sitting under your tree, a vine tree, a fig tree, whatever. That was your place. Under the leaves, you would find healing as you visit with friends and share. And so here Micah is using that same imagery. Each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree. He will have a place. He will not fear. And that's what God wants for us. He doesn't want us to run around fearing him. Romans, we get to Romans there with Paul. Paul says there in chapter 8, which is the grace chapter, this is the culmination of the gospel story that he began there in chapter 1, where he says, I'm going to preach the gospel to you. And there in chapter 8, we have this glorious chapter on grace. Many times the word grace is used in there. I don't remember exactly, something like 23 times. It's used copiously. He writes, for you have not received a spirit of slavery leading to fear again. You should not be afraid of God. He says, but instead you have received the spirit of adoption as sons and daughters, by which we cry out, Abba. Abba is the Hebrew word for father. He is our father, not one we should be afraid of. Find peace with God, because he loves you, and we're not to be afraid of him. Find your peace. Find your chair under that tree, and not be afraid anymore. Blessings.